Bruchim Haboim al Choshev Etzuarer. We are, this week is again, just a few parshas that come together. We're holding by Achrei Mois and Kedoshim. Achrei Mois and Kedoshim speak about, Achrei Mois speaks primarily about Yom Kippur. The whole avodah of Yom Kippur. If you look at parshas Achrei Mois, you actually find a very interesting paradox. It starts speaking about the holiest day of the year, and how the Kohen Gadol wanted the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he did the avodah, and the holiest day. What comes right after that? Right after that comes the parshas of Arayos, the discussion of forbidden relationships. And if you look at the Kriyas HaTorah of Yom Kippur, if you pay close attention, you'll see that by Shacharis, we read the parshas Achrei Mois that speaks about the avodah of Yom Kippur. And then, in the afternoon, by Mincha, what do we read about? It's the same parshas. Parshas Arayos is parshas Achrei Mois. It speaks about the prohibited relationships. A person could ask, we're talking here the holiest day of the year, the holiest moments, the holiest inspiration. At that point where we should be at least above and beyond dealing with the lowliest types of addictions, the lowliest types of desires that a human being has. You leave that Arayos for another day, leave it for another time. Why do we jump from one extreme to the other? From the holiest day, on the holiest day of Yom Kippur, what do we speak about is Arayos. And the point is, the Rebbe says, this is all connected with the name of the Parsha Achrei. Achrei means after. You know, they say in Hebrew, Hayom Sha'achrei, the day after. A person is being inspired on Yom Kippur, or any day of the year for that price. The question always is, what happens after the inspiration? A person always has to realize that inspiration, you might be in a very high state of inspiration, but if you have to be able to channel that inspiration, that it should have an effect with Peil Mamish, you have to realize, even when in the height of inspiration, that you still have the Yetzer Hara, you still have issues that you have to deal with, and make sure that when you're height of the inspiration, you take back with you energy, inspiration, whatever it is, that stick with you at the time when you have to deal with the hardest temptations, the hardest challenges of life. So this is the message of the word Achrei. After you're holding on Yom Kippur, we tell the Jew, remember, tomorrow won't be Yom Kippur. Tomorrow you have to filter down your inspiration into action. Remember that you have a Yetzer Hara now on the day of Yom Kippur. Don't think that you forgot about the Yetzer Hara. Remember that now is the time to make the resolutions to be careful in the most base, things that a person might have. So this is also connected. What happened? What do we speak about in the beginning of Parshas Achrei? We're speaking about the avodah of the sons of Aaron. What happened to the avodah of the sons of Aaron? Nadav and Avihu, they were the greatest tzaddikim of their generation, and they passed away. They brought keteras, they brought incense that wasn't called for. They went into the Holy of Holies, whatever it is. Then they were burnt up in a godly fire. And Chassidus discusses at length that the sin of the sons of Aaron shouldn't be understood in the literal sense. They were just, people that, were just violating, the commandments of the Eibishter. On the contrary, Nadav and Avihu were very great. Moshe told Aaron that they degraded than me and you. But the sin of Nadav and Avihu was that they had such a burning desire to come close to Hashem. They weren't interested in bringing their inspiration and going back into the world. What Chassidus calls a ratzoi b'li shuv, a desire to run away from the world without the inspiration of bringing it back down. So the sons of Aaron, they wasn't a punishment that they died. On the contrary, this is what they were looking for. They were looking to run away from the world. They were looking to get burnt up with the godly fire. But the Torah calls it a sin because the Eibishter's desires, there should be a dira b'tachtonim, should bring godliness down here into the lowest realms. Don't run away from the world. There has to be a ratzoi and a shuv. That's why Nadav and Avihu weren't married. They call what's marriage? You bring children and you bring the shamas down into the world, into bodies. So, but a Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, it says he has to be married. If the Kohen Gadol is not married on Yom Kippur, he can't be the Kohen Gadol. Why? One of the ideas here is that the highest inspiration of Yom Kippur has to be able to filter down in bringing the shamas into Gufim. So what's the point? And the Nekuda is that Parshas Achrei teaches us that inspiration on its own is very important. It's very powerful, but the inspiration has to be able to be felt Achrei afterward. They say a story, Amel Lefutaf said a word, a mashal, whatever you want to say. There was a Jewish actor, you ever see there's plays that they have, that they used to make. There was a Jewish actor that he used to do different Jewish plays, and after 120 years he goes upstairs, and they started to ask him if he has anything good to show for himself. So he says, and he doesn't, maybe he wasn't, didn't have much to show for himself. He said, you know what, I used to do plays about the Achrei Yitzchak, how Avram was ready to sacrifice his son for the Eibishter, and I used to play it out, and people started weeping and crying and getting all inspired and awakened. And, that was that should be considered some good merits for me. So they said, you know what, let's make a check. If any one person in the audience that was watching your play was awakened as a result of this moving play, watching this moving scene to be inspired to do a mitzvah, to put on tefillin, to keep Shabbos, then granted, we'll give you the zchus. But they went through all the people in the theater, people got inspired, they got moved, they started crying, but it didn't affect them. Because they weren't focusing on taking this excitement, this they were there to watch a play. They weren't there to bring anything down to practical life. Inspiration shouldn't be a theater. Inspiration shouldn't be to get high. Inspiration should be to bring it down into practical life. This is also connected with Parshas Kedoshim. Kedoshim is the same thing. Kedoshim is holiness. And in holiness, there's different levels of holiness. There's very simple holiness. There's being holy, as Rashi says, also Prushim min Aroyis, min Aveda, being, controlling yourself on things that are the most difficult things. That's also holiness. On the other hand, you have the highest levels of holiness. As the Medrash says, you should be as holy as the Eibishter himself. A person has to try to reach the highest levels of holiness. But they're both connected. A person has to realize that holiness means both things. It means being, even when you're involved in the world, you should separate yourself, you should control yourself. At the same time, even someone that's in a very high level has to know he still has to reach higher. There's another Achrei. Achrei also means after. You reached one level, remember there's another level to reach. So that's some of the ideas that are connected with Parshas Achrei, Moshe, and Kedoshim. There's also a number of particular things to focus on, but one thing that's very appropriate for the time that we're in, the days of Sfira, is the Parshas Kedoshim, is the pasuk of Ahavta l'recha kamocha. And Rashi brings out that Rabbi Kiva says, Zek klal gadol b'Torah, that Ahavta l'recha kamocha is a great principle in the Torah, which simply means there's many, many mitzvahs that are offshoots, that are branches from this main mitzvah of Ahavta l'recha kamocha. Furthermore, there's we know Hillel said the same thing as Rabbi Kiva said it, but on a much deeper level, as the Rabbi explains, that he says that Ahavas Yisrael is the entire Torah, right? This is the whole Torah, because at their source, the Jew is one with the Eibishter. So the idea of Ahavta l'recha kamocha, loving your fellow as you love yourself, and particularly that with teaching with Rabbi Akiva, is very timely, because this is the message of the days of Sfira. One of the things on days of Sfira, we're officially trying to refine our character, but one particular area which is most specifically highlighted is the idea of Avas Yisrael, because the students of Rabbi Akiva, they didn't have honor one with the other. Avas Yisrael means you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now we know you get lost. Chassidus explains, how is it possible you should love your friend as you love yourself? How is it possible everyone loves themselves? As much as a person loves his closest family members, at the end of the day, he still loves himself more. So Chassidus explains, because the Jew is really one with you, you're not loving someone else, you're loving yourself, whatever the explanation might be. But in very simple terms, we sometimes get lost with the intensity of Avas Yisrael, and we forget simple halachic definition of Avas Yisrael means a little bit similar to what Hillel said. Don't do to someone else what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. You don't want people to talk about you by the dinner table. Don't talk about someone else by the dinner table. You don't want people to badmouth, to look at you a certain way. Don't look at someone else that way. You want people to judge you favorably. If you're having a hard day, and therefore you're short-circuited, and every time someone tells you something, you blow up. You want people to understand. The same thing is, you should want, if you see someone else that's that way, you should also realize that he also wants people to understand. So that Avas Yisrael, forget about, like someone asked him, how do you bring Achdus? How do you bring Avas Yisrael? How do you reach? So he says, you don't have to have Avas Yisrael. What you have to have is you shouldn't fight. He was trying to say, don't start digging the highest levels of Avas Yisrael. Look at the practical things. Give people their space. Give people their respect. Don't, realize that they're human beings. They're created by the Eibishter. It's a very, very important thing we use Avos Yisrael, Jewish people, we have a lot of, every Jew has infinite energy in them, infinite oitzres, infinite treasures, as the Baal Shem Tov said. What happens is, if you don't work on ourselves, so these treasures sometimes get expressed in certain situations where Yetzer Hara doesn't mix in. You're dealing with someone that's mamash a nebach case, or someone that's in a very terrible situation. That's when the Avos Yisrael gets awakened. With Avos Yisrael, the guy that I work with, the guy that's sitting next to me the whole day, Rabbi Yisrael, it's much harder to do it. Why? Because here, the Yetzer Hara, you don't all of a sudden feel, this holy feeling of going beyond yourself. Here, this is something you're dealing with yourself. But this guy is part and parcel of your life. It's very hard. Sometimes you have the biggest, kindest people, the biggest charitable people, but when it comes to their own home, right? But they say charity starts at home. So V'ahavta l'recha kamecha is a very powerful point. It's true Avos Yisrael. It's not just, if a guy is in need to give him a buck, but it's, think about it. Don't do to the other person what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. And Tzemach Tzedek says a very powerful word. He says, why does Hillel say it in the negative? He should have said that act to other people, give them generously, do good things to them as you would want to be done to yourself. Why does he say it in the negative? Don't do to others what you don't want to be done to yourself. So he explained this. He explained very interestingly. He said every person has chesronos. Every person has faults. Not only every person has faults, but the person himself who has the faults knows much better what his faults are and how severe they are, and he's more upset about them than anyone else. But what happens if someone else will tell you, you're a lazy person, or you're this? You're going to get so upset. Why are you going to get so upset? No, what the guy is saying is true, and it bothers you yourself. But what happens is, a person has a natural, I don't know what to call it, a pill, a tranquilizer. He has all these things that bother him, but he loves himself so much that he excuses it. He says, it's okay, fine, good. When someone else points out the person's fault, at this point the guy is basically, making him guilty because of it. He's taking away the cover of self-love, which excuses everything. The guy is pinpointing it. He's exposing it for what it is. And that makes a person extremely upset. He doesn't want...
Vulnerable.
Very vulnerable, however you want to put it. Yeah, so the Tzemach Tzedek says the same thing is, when you have someone else, and that other person is doing something inappropriate, you shouldn't do to him what you don't want to be done to yourself. Don't expose his faults. You're the same way you have self-love for yourself, you should have love for that other person to the extent that whatever negative thing he does, you shouldn't focus on. It's a very powerful point. Every person knows that some person that he really likes, or somebody that he really admires, whatever it is, if somebody will tell him negative things about him, he'll say, yeah, true, but, right? So he's, yeah, true, but when he sees someone that he doesn't like, even if he does a small thing, he'll say, how dare the person do it, right? There's no buts over here. There's no, yeah. So the point is that, it's something we should try to, at least know that this is what is right and what is wrong, and next time we actually get into a fight with someone else, we'll be able to control ourselves and not focus on what's right. And first of all, we should, simple ace when you get excited is just stop talking. That's what it says. If you're too angry about someone, count until 15 till 300 before you respond. But you should realize that you're supposed to look at somebody else as you, the same way you have your temptations. So you see another person doing something, you should give him his space, give him his recognition that person also has reasons, he's coming from somewhere, and don't expose his, treat him with the same dignity and respect that you want yourself to be treated. That's one of the nekudas of Parshas Kedoshim of V'ahavta l'recha kamecha. So this is the nekuda over here. The idea is that Achrei Kedoshim speak a lot about many different mitzvahs. And most importantly, the word Kedoshim, holiness, again, holiness is a term that's used very often. There are many people inspired to be holy, but it's also one of it's a misused term, because holiness is usually understood by people to mean someone that runs away from the world. But the true holiness means that when you deal with people, you're able to be to deal within the world in the dignified, pure, holy way. That is the ultimate test of holiness. And that is the nekuda of Parshas Kedoshim. And the nekuda connected also with Sfiras HaImra. So this is something we're supposed to work on ourselves, and we know that preparing ourselves for the Torah, for the giving of the Torah on Shavuos, coming also to Lag BaOmer, which is the revelation of Pnimius HaTorah. It's all based on the nekuda of Avos Yisrael, of accepting another Jew. Only then is a person a true Keli for Torah. And we're coming to Pesach Sheni as well, right? Next week is Pesach Sheni, Yudal Iyar, if I'm not mistaken. So it will be before next Rabbi, I guess. But anyway, Pesach Sheni is Nishtakein Farfalin. There's nothing that's lost, that's gone. Nothing that's lost. Any opportunity that you think was lost really should inspire you to do more. There's one interesting thing in Torah. A Jew has the power. This was the idea of tshuva also, which you speak about in Yom Kippur. A Jew has the power to transform the past. There's nothing that's lost. The person has the power, or that it's to take any opportunity. If he's upset about something that was lost in the past, so by doing something good because of that, by learning from his mistakes, he's able to transform in a certain way, at least, the negative thing that happened in the past is something good. When the Nishtah came for our found, there's always a second chance, always opportunity to make up. And the Iker is, what's the Iker of it all? The Iker of it all is that the idea of Kedoshim, the idea of true holiness is, from one hand, that a Jew should be above everything, be connected with the Eibishter in the most intense way. The other hand, the idea of Kedoshim means that when you're involved in the world, you should also be holy. Which is the idea of Dira B'Tachtainim. This is, anyway, the main thing is, I just want to finish up with one thought that we also have in this week's parsha. It says, one of the psukim in this week's parsha speak about that if you see someone suffering, don't stand in the blood of your friend. So Rashi says, for example, if you see someone drowning in a river, and Chaya list and Boimalov, and there's or whatever, there's robbers or animals that are chasing him. So don't just stand there. Don't just stand there. You know, they say a story of a guy that was hired as a watchman at a jewelry store, and the owner comes the next morning, and he sees all the jewelry is gone. So what happened? So there was a robbery. He said, "But I hired you to watch the store." I said, "I was. I was watching whatever was going on." So don't just stand there and watch. If you see, it says don't stand there. You know, if you're able to help them, do something about it. That's what Rashi says. That's what our Chachamim say. So the Rebbe says a very powerful, simple word. The Rebbe says, Rashi doesn't just mean, Rashi trying to say one thing goes together. The fact that you're standing there and you see it happening means you're able to do something about it. From heaven, they wouldn't show you something if you're not able to do anything about it. So the fact, that's what the Baal Shem Tov says. It doesn't just mean, technically, if you're able to do something, don't just stand there. But spiritually means if you see something happening, don't just stand there. The fact that it was shown to you means that you could do something about it. Try to help him. You don't know, you're in a doubt. Maybe I will help him, maybe I won't. Maybe this guy will survive, maybe he won't. Doesn't make a difference. You have to do what you could to help him. Why? Besides the fact that's what has to be done, but more particularly the fact that you heard about it means there's something that's negated to you. So we should all put in our little part in having Avos Yisrael and increasing in self-refinement, increasing in self-holiness, in making sure that not to be holy in a way that we forget about other people, but to be holy in a way that we channel our holiness down into our day-to-day life. And by doing so, we should merit the coming of Mashiach, and we will then be able to be holy and experience holiness while we are in the Neshama and a Guf. We won't run away from the world. When Mashiach will come, we'll be involved in the world. We're involved in the world in a very holy manner. Should we take it from Yad Mamash?